My name is Erica Larkins, and I'm the director of the Boehner-Stiefel Center for Brazilian Studies at San Diego State University. I have the honor of opening our event with a land acknowledgement to express gratitude and appreciation for those on whose unceded territory we live and work. For millennia, the Kumeyaay people have been part of this land. This land has nourished, healed, protected, and embraced them for many generations in a relationship of balance and harmony. As members of the San Diego State community, we acknowledge this legacy. We promote this balance and harmony. We find inspiration from this land, the land of the Kumeyaay. On behalf of the Boehner-Stiefel Center for Brazilian Studies, I am pleased to welcome you to the first lecture in a three-part series on Indigenous women in the Brazilian Amazon. This series is the result of a partnership with Nature and Culture International and Projeto Bem Viver, and is made possible by generous support from Keith Boehner and Catherine Stiefel. Thank you, Kathy and Keith, and hopefully you're in the audience. I would also like to acknowledge the collaboration of San Diego State University's Department of American Indian Studies, as well as the Center for Latin American Studies. Thank yous are in order for those who have contributed to today's event. Thank you to the excellent team at NCI, with special thanks to Sylvia Useranga and Karina Kopen. In addition, much gratitude to the outstanding group at Projeto Bem Viver, and in particular, Reinaldo Lorival and Leda Martins. And lastly, at the Center for Brazilian Studies, thank you to the amazing Crystal Bivona, as well as Flavia Suarez, Brooke Dolabella, and Amethyst Sanchez. As I mentioned, this is the first of a three-part series taking place over the course of this month. Today will provide us with a valuable overview and understanding of environmental policy and politics, with the next session focused on climate challenges and territorial protection, and the final panel examining the impact of COVID-19 on Indigenous Amazonia. All of the lectures will be available for viewing on the website of our new Digital Brazil project and on our YouTube channel. So please follow us on that site and let those who cannot attend the live lectures know about these resources. Leda Martins from Projeto Bem Viver will now also welcome us via a video, so cue the video.
Welcome to the Amazon, Brazil, the largest tropical rainforest in the planet, birthplace to more than 30 million species. But the Amazon is being destroyed at a growing pace. Last year, Brazil was responsible for 1/3 of the total loss of virgin forest in the world. We invite you, the academic community from the Center for Brazilian Studies, to hear the voices and know the experience of 8 women who study, who live and defend the forest and their community. We'll have 3 webinars, one today and the others on the 12th and the 26th of October. I'll see you then.
I would like to now welcome Matt Clark, President of Nature and Culture International, our partner on this initiative, to say a few words before I introduce our speakers. So Matt?
My name is Matt Clark. Thank you for introducing me, Erica. As you can see, I'm zooming in live from my kitchen, and we actually have a new kitten in my family who is until recently attacking me. So if the screen goes dark, you'll know that I was attacked by a small furry creature. So I am the president of Nature and Culture International. Very, very pleased to be here today. Wanted to second Erica's warm welcome to all of you. My organization, very privileged to be co-hosting this event. Briefly, we are a conservation nonprofit based in San Diego. And in our 22 years since our founding, we have protected more than 21 million acres in among the most carbon-rich, biodiverse, and culturally diverse landscapes on our planet, specifically those in the Amazon and Andes of South America and the subtropical forests of northern Mexico. Would love to hear from you. We always love hearing from like-minded folks. So check us out at natureandculture.org and please get in touch. I have some thank yous as well. Many of the same that Erica mentioned. First and foremost, want to thank the Stiefel Boehner Charitable Fund for making this wonderful series possible. If you are in the audience, Keith and Kathy, we are very grateful and looking forward to this very much. I want to thank all of our co-hosts, and in particular, our good friends at the Center for Brazilian Studies at San Diego State University. All the people who made this possible, who are watching, I hope. Thank you very much. Our project staff, Leda, who you saw already, and as well as Reinaldo and Emily, and our project partners in the field in Brazil. And last but not least, our esteemed speakers, who again, I'm really excited to hear what you have to say today. So I'm not going to yak anymore. I will turn it over to you, and everyone enjoy this wonderful opportunity to learn about Brazil. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Matt. So let me just say a quick word on format. Each speaker is going to talk for about 25 minutes, after which we'll have a question and answer session via the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. So please feel free to submit questions at any time in that box. However, we're going to hold the answering of the questions until the end after both of the speakers have given their presentations. So without further delay, let me introduce our speakers. Adriana Ramos coordinates the Policy and Law Program of the Instituto Socioambiental and has been working on advocacy to improve social and environmental legislation and policies related to indigenous people's rights, tropical forests, and other ecosystems in Brazil for over 25 years. During this time, she has served as a representative of NGOs in the Guidance Committee of the Amazon Fund, coordinator of Brazilian NGO Forum Working Group on Forests, member of the National Environmental Council of Brazil as elected representative of Brazilian NGOs in the period between 2002 and 2006. She's also a member of the Brazilian NGO Association Board of Directors. Anny Alencar is Director of Science at Instituto de Pesquisa Ambiental da Amazônia, IPAM. She holds a PhD in Forest Resources and Conservation from the University of Florida and focuses on dynamics of deforestation in the Amazon, as well as on participatory policy processes. Today, she is recognized as an international leader in research about fires and climate change in the Amazon. So Adriana, Anny, thank you so much for being here. We're really looking forward to hearing from you. So I'll turn the floor over to you. I think Adriana is going to speak first.
Thank you, Erica. Thanks for the invitation and the opportunity to share with you some of our views about what's going on in Brazil, especially in the Amazon at the moment. I have a presentation so that you can follow. And first, I would like to say that, as Erica already mentioned, I've been working following what happens in public policies in Brazil in social environmental issues for 25 years. So it means that I have heard about our actual president for a long time, especially because he used to be one of the most proeminent parliamentaries against indigenous rights for all his life. So he always had the focus on trying to avoid indigenous rights and to question the international interests in the Amazon in order to try to set that all the environmental approach and agenda for the Amazon was not something genuine coming from Brazil. So the next slide, please. So what we are seeing nowadays is just the president making it electoral speech coming true. He has said that he wanted to extinguish the Ministry of Environment, but he was not allowed by the public opinion to do that. So what we are seeing nowadays is that they are trying to make all the federal agencies on environment weaker. And that's working both by changing the legal framework, but also by the way they talk about these issues. So since Bolsonaro was once fishing inside the protected area, and he was fined by a guard of the environmental agents. So he started to say that Brazil had an industry of fines and criticize all the work of fiscalization and to enforce environmental legislation. So since he arrived in the presidency, they have been very proactive in trying to dismantle all the efforts to guarantee that our environmental legislation that was built in this 20 years, or at least 30 years after the Brazilian Constitution, to try to make it weaker. So he said also that he wouldn't allow any more centimeter of indigenous land to be recognized, and the government is not doing. On the opposite, the government has sent back to the beginning of the procedures 25 different processes of indigenous territories that were almost at the end of the procedure of demarcation. They paralyzed all the programs and policies that were in place for the control of deforestation. And of course, Brazil was already with a lack of enforcement of this plan, but nothing compared to what happens today. All the coordinators and directors of the environmental agencies, especially those the agents that is responsible for managing the protected areas, are now militaries. So there is a general militarization of environmental agencies. And in fact, today we saw a piece of news in the newspaper saying that all the changes that the government did to put the actions of control of illegal deforestation in the hands of the militaries are just sending money to infrastructure inside military areas, but not improving the way they are working with control. So it's very common in Brazil that normally people think that all militaries are more respectful or prepared people to work on the ground in this kind of things. But the fact is that when you take the environmental agencies from the leadership of the actions of control, you take all the intelligence regarding the dynamic of deforestation out. So what we are seeing is that the government is using a lot of money with the army, but that doesn't imply into efficiency in the results of these actions. Also, what we are seeing is that the government is looking at indigenous territories as a new frontier for development, just thinking of bringing to these areas economic activities that do not connect to the traditional ways of living of the indigenous peoples, which are normally very connected to the fact that indigenous territories are very important for conservation. Next, please. My organization has done an analysis on few situations we had last year in which the government had made speeches defending those that are acting illegally in the Amazon. So the first one, for example, in Cujubim, which is a city in the state of Rondônia, in which the public servers had found an illegal activity of logging, and they had burned the machines that they use. It's very hard for a public agent to go inside the forest to find an illegal activity. And how does he guarantee that he's going to stop that illegality? He has to take the machines that they use out, but it's impossible to do that in the forest. So the Brazilian legislation allows those agents to put fire and to destroy the machines and all the equipment that are used in the illegal activity. What happened at this day was that we had an area that in March had 412,000 hectares deforested. Then there was an action of IBAMA, and in this action, sorry, it was not 412 hectares, it was 412 signs of alert in the system that detects deforestation. Then IBAMA came to the area, and then of course those alerts goes down because people are in the area taking control. But after Bolsonaro have announced that it was not to burn anything, any kind of equipment, that's not the procedure, that's not the orientation of the government, he said. Then we had the high level of alerts coming after that. So in May, we have 2,291 alerts on deforestation in the same region, just like a reaction from the illegal loggers to what Bolsonaro said. They feel protected by that. Next, please. So the other case was when the minister Ricardo Salles went to meet also illegal loggers in Espigão do Oeste, and also have defended them and saying that the fiscalization should not come through what was going on there. Then the same thing, we had 87 alerts. Then we had the presence of the Ministry of Environment in the region, and it raises. And after that, it kept high. So what happens nowadays is that after three decades of strong work from Brazilian authorities and civil society to talk about deforestation as something that is completely out of place and that is completely unacceptable in the Amazon, because we must shift the development in the Amazon from a development that has to take the forest out for a development that uses the forest stand. But now we have a government that's saying the opposite and is strengthening and giving power to those that act illegally. That will also affect the numbers of conflicts and violence we have against indigenous leaders and other environmental defenders. Brazil is already in the top of the countries that with risk for environmental defenders, and the situation we are seeing now makes that worse. Next slide, please. These are some of the speech that Bolsonaro have said about indigenous people, with one important remark just to give an idea on how he mentions indigenous people, is that he has said that the Indians are evolving more and more, and they are almost human beings like us. Next, please. The government is also proposing a lot of change in the legal framework in Brazil. So we have different bills proposals that will turn illegal deforestation into legal. So we will, if we change the legislation of land regularization as the government wants, we will have new areas allowed to deforest considering the actual legislation. There are proposals even from the son of the president to extinguish the legal reserve, which is the part of the forest legislation that obliges the landowners to keep part of their lands as forest. And also flexibilities on licensing, and the idea that the development for indigenous people should be driven by activities such as mining and cattle ranching or soy production inside indigenous territories. The government has also done different changes under infralegal proposals, and that is something that they have announced as an opportunity in this moment during the pandemic, because nobody would pay attention on that. So the minister has said that we should take the opportunity to change all the regulations. What's the problem of changing the regulations and the legal framework for forest conservation in Brazil? The problem is that we already have a legislation that has been weakening during the recent years, but especially when we talk about deforestation. Next slide, please. We will see that the Brazilian commitment within the Paris Agreement, so what Brazil says about deforestation and its national determined contribution, is that we will achieve zero illegal deforestation by 2030, which means that if we change the legislation and allow this illegal deforestation to be legal, we will be okay with our contribution in the Paris Agreement. Nowadays, around 86% of deforestation in the Amazon is illegal. So the first point is that Brazil has to strengthen a lot the enforcement of the legislation and then control agenda to reduce deforestation. But it would be, of course, much easier if we turn this 86% of illegal deforestation into legal by changing the rules. So this is a very worrying situation we are seeing now. Next. What we see nowadays, and we will see surely in Annie's presentation, that is going on in the Amazon, and it's mostly illegal, can be legal next year. So one important thing to highlight is that there is a lot of international consensus and scientific consensus already about the role that indigenous territories play in conservation. And in the Amazon, we are talking about more than 20% of the Amazon recognized as indigenous territories, and another set of territories which are territories recognized as protected areas, both for conservation like national parks, but also some areas that are for sustainable use of different traditional communities. And there is a strong effort of the government to try to show people that these communities are should wonder to live just the way we that live in the cities would like to live. So it would be an opportunity for them to make more money than to keep their traditional way of living. But that's the tricky question, because first of all, there is no legitimacy in this, and the majority of the indigenous movements, and you will have the opportunity to listen for some indigenous women here, are against this kind of opening the territories, because Brazilian constitution recognizes indigenous territories as lands that are for the exclusive use of the communities. The indigenous people do not own the land. The indigenous territories are land from the union, from the country, but they are set for the exclusive use of indigenous peoples, because they recognize the necessity of these peoples to have their traditional way of living in those territories. Once the government manages to open these territories for any other kind of activity, especially if we are talking about mining, which is a high impact activity, then the indigenous people will be showing that they do not need the territory to their livelihoods. They can open hands of the territories to other kind of use. So it's a tricky situation, because even if in certain situations that could be something that could guarantee any kind of support for indigenous peoples or solution for the lack of income they have, that would give all the arguments for questioning the constitution and all the criteria that bases the definition of an indigenous territory. Next, please. So what happens as a result, and I'm sure Annie will show that more better than me, is that deforestation inside indigenous land has increased a lot, 64% in the beginning of 2020, because that's just the reflection of what Bolsonaro says. If he's not going to defend the patrimony of indigenous territories, then he's just saying to the others that you can go in. And since they defend that they will open these territories for gold mining or other mining activities, they are giving incentives for people to invade these areas, you know. And now gold mining is one of the most dangerous and important drivers of deforestation inside indigenous territories. So in these numbers here, you can see what was the deforestation that was inside these specific territories until July 2019. And then we have the number of hectares that increased deforestation only between 2019 and 2020, and the deforestation that we have in the first months of the year until July 2020. Understanding that the dry season and the deforestation season in the Amazon had not begun yet when we had these numbers. So we have an important increase of this deforestation, which is invasion, and especially now during the pandemic, because then also the government has, slowly all its efforts of control. Next, please. So here, just to give an idea on what we are seeing as invasion of gold miners inside one indigenous territory. This is the Terra Indígena Munduruku in the state of Pará. And we can see this pink plots in the map, which is the gold miners' activities inside the area this year until August 2020. And on the other image, we can see one of the rivers of the indigenous territory completely occupied by gold mining. And the Minister of Environment in this overview, and not to mention his smile, because I think that is one of the images that gives a good idea about what this government thinks. Anyone that respects and recognizes the importance of indigenous people and the Amazon, that would be seeing what he is seeing, would be definitely much more worried than happy with that. So I think that was the main points I would like to bring. I think the government is also acting in a strong way to try to reduce the voices of civil society that are denouncing what is going on. So there is a strong campaign from governmental spokespeople against indigenous people, against NGOs, trying to denounce and to say that when they arrived, they decided to cut all the resources for Brazilian NGOs. And because they did that, based on, what they want to say that were lack of responsibility and transparency in managing public resources, then the government saying that NGOs are now criticizing him because they have cut the money that comes from civil society, for civil society. What is not true, first of all, because there is very few money from the government within civil society in Brazil for a long time. The government has really paralyzed the Amazon Fund, which was our main tool for supporting sustainable development projects in the Amazon. But that didn't imply to any kind of risk for civil society. And the problem is that what we are seeing that is going on, and all the lies that both the president and the ministers tell, is something that has no reason or no argument that can defend it. So the only way they find to answer the denounces and what we are criticizing is to try to come back with criticisms also and denounces against us. So we hope that this is something that will pass quickly in Brazil, because what we are seeing, and I'm sure that you will see that more clear in Annie's presentation, is a situation that is putting under risk all the efforts that we have developed until now to guarantee that the Amazon keep as the biggest forested areas in the world and the home of several different indigenous peoples and communities that depend on the forest to live. Thank you.
Thank you, Adriana. Annie?
Thank you. Adriana gave a very good explanation on the scenario that we are living on. So I will bring some information on what are the main causes and give the dimension of the fires and deforestation in the region since last year when this government started to since this government started. So basically, we last year, in fact, in August last year, the world was very worried about Brazil due to the fires that we have seen in the Amazon, and mostly because the smoke of these fires, not only probably the Amazon fires, but also other fires occurring in South America, arrived in São Paulo and made the day night. So I don't know, that was a pronounce of what we were about to have, and it was very important to bring this theme to the world. So before I start to talk about fire and deforestation in the Amazon, I always bring this triangle, fire triangle, to explain how can I say, the basics of fire science, so we can actually identify the problem and demonstrate where to act to fight the problem. So when you talk about fire in the Amazon, I guess elsewhere, there are three major components of elements that will interact together so fire can happen. The first one, I mean, not necessarily in the order, but I will start by the fuel material. So for the fire to be carried out, we have to have enough fuel material in a quality and a condition ready to keep the fire on and spreading the fire. So second, we have to have weather conditions that are make this fire, in fact, to goes on, to escape, to spread. And third, and not less important, we need to have the ignition sources. And why I have I leave the ignition sources to the last, because when you see, for example, in the fires in California or in Florida or in Australia last year, we know that these environments, these ecosystems, they are adapted to fire, they are somehow dependent to fire. And most of the ignition sources in these places are natural ignition sources. Of course, what we have seen in California recently is that the ignition sources have been changed by human intervention because we are intervene in climate change. So, I mean, the ignition sources, even though they are natural, have been changed by human activities. However, in the Amazon, when you talk about the Amazon, we talk about a humid forest, and we're talking about an environment that, if not undisturbed, would rarely catch fire. Because when we had ignition sources from lightnings, the fuel material will be very humid, and the weather condition probably will be also like rainy. So anyway we look at this triangle, we will notice that what is going on in the Amazon is that we are getting out of control of the ignition sources. So if you want to stop fire in the Amazon, we do have to have policies and that in fact cut or reduce or manage the ignition sources. And by talking about what happened last year, when a lot of people were talking about, oh, I mean, when the fires started in August last year, the government, even Bolsonaro, was saying, oh, this in fact in the Amazon, we had an average rainfall year, the number of days without rain, which is one important index, one good index that we use to indicate drought, the severity of the drought in the region. Demonstrate that we, in fact, in July, we had more days with rain than without rains compared to the past 2 years. So in a way, in 2009, we had a more humid year compared to other recent years in the Amazon, if we take only that indicator. However, we did have a lot of fires in August, as I was mentioning before. It was very worrisome because usually the fires we have more fires in August than in July when the fire season starts. But usually the fire peaks in September. So if we had that amount of fire in August, imagine what we would have in September. So, and that was what called our attention on about the fire and generated all the commotion that you guys may have saw last year. And in fact, that at that point, in the end of August, with a lot of pressure, the government created 2 decrees. One was like making the army available to the states so they can use the army to fight fires. And the other was like establish a ban a fire ban for 60 days, more or less, I guess. I think 60 days, yeah. And in fact, fires decreased, reduced a lot, and we had an October that with less amount of fire hot pixels in the last years. However, deforestation, which is the root cause of fire, didn't stop. I mean, as you can see in the gray lines below, you can see the pattern of deforestation that is very spread all over the year, starting in February, going until September, October, but it's a very kind of flat curve. Last year, we had a major peak in July, August, and September, which was very unusual and not normal. So, I mean, clearly people were taking advantage of everything that Adriana said and demonstrated, of the how can I say, the unlegitimacy of this government in recognizing the role of the forest and also wanting to in fact like close the eyes to the problem, to everything that it was going on in the Amazon. So how we are this year, we did have probably the same pattern of fires. In fact, we are having more fires now than we had last year. And on top of that, I mean, we had a ban established in the beginning of July to cut fires, to ban fires for the next 4 years, I mean 4 months, starting in July, so until October. And we also had the army in the field since May, but apparently the curves of fire and the curve of deforestation didn't reduce much. In fact, the fires increased, and deforestation did reduce a little bit if we count what happened in July in August, but we still have very high rates of deforestation compared to the past years. So when you do that in an accumulated curve, we see that deforestation is about the same that we had last year. So when you look at the hot pixels, which are the measurements of active fires that we use to indicate the trends of burned of fire in the Amazon, we see clearly that in orange, by September this year, we had the highest number of hot pixels since 2010, when we had one of the major droughts affecting the Amazon. So, which means that we are in a bad situation, and probably you have much more fires this year, since compared to last year, since we still have October, November, and December to go. And October and November are still months with high with burns in part of the Amazon. So this is just to demonstrate that we did have a major increase in deforestation. These are the D-tier numbers, which are a type of deforestation alert system that Brazil has. They are monthly statistics on deforestation. They didn't get all the accumulated deforestation in the year, but they are very good indicators of if deforestation is increasing or not. So just for you to have an idea, the TER number usually represents 50% of the official numbers of deforestation. So if we had more than 9,000 square kilometers happening from August last year to July this year, probably we will reach about 14,000 or 15,000 square kilometers of deforestation, a number that we haven't seen since I think 2005, which is a very high number. And this is just to demonstrate that even though we had a reduction in deforestation in July this year compared to last year, which was an absurd, is much, much higher than the average of the past years. So we are in a bad shape. And just to understand how is the geography of fire and deforestation is taking place in the Amazon, I think it's very, very important to understand how it turns out in terms of territories. And if we look at this pizza graph in the left, maybe, yeah, in your left, which is the tenor area, and it represents how the Amazon biome is divided in tenure categories. And we can see that about half of the Amazon, which includes all the green tones of colors in this pizza, half of the Amazon is somehow protected. So we have 25% of the Amazon is in some type of, it's an indigenous territory. 21% is in types of protected areas, which we call conservation units. And we have 4% of the Amazon. There is a type of conservation units, but has, how can I say, a private management of these areas, which we call APAT, which is like permanent protected areas. So half of the Amazon is legally under some type of protection. We have the 18 plus 8%, which we call like areas that are used by small, medium, and large landholders, settlers, and things like that. So they can, like, they use the land, they do pasture fields and slash and burn agriculture and things like that. And we have 15% of the Amazon is under, is formally for undesignated forest public lands, which means that they are public lands designated to be forest, but they have to still to be designated to be which type of protection of forest they will be. And we have 9% of the public lands that we don't know what they are going to be yet. So when we look at the fire numbers and how they occur in this pizza graph, we see that only 7% of the fires that occurred in the Amazon last year occurred inside of indigenous territories. So when the president goes to the General Assembly and mentions and says that the indigenous peoples, the fires that we have seen are because indigenous peoples use fire and things like that. I mean, it's so wrong, because only 7% of the fires occur inside of indigenous territories. And it's very important to highlight that from this 7%, almost half occurred in few indigenous lands that are being invaded by mining, illegal mining, by illegal logging, or even by squatters. So most of the fires, as we would expect, happen inside of private property areas, settlements, where people do use fire to produce and things like that. But what also called our attention is that 18% of the fires happen inside of undesignated public forest, and which means, like, if we put together this 18 and the 12, we have 30% of the fires happening in public lands, in public forests that have been grabbed by land grabbers. And when we look to the deforestation pizza graph, we see that deforestation is happening very strong in these public lands. And we see that only 5% of deforestation happened inside indigenous territories. So first of all, indigenous peoples are not the ones that burn the Amazon and deforest the Amazon. They are very, very, very far from that. Second is Brazil is losing its patrimony, its forests, its public forests, to land grabbers, and that per se has to change. So if we take that pizza, this last pizza, we see that almost half, a little bit of half of deforestation happened inside public lands, because indigenous lands are, as Adriana mentioned, can be used by indigenous peoples, but the ownership of the territories from the union. And the same with conservation units. And these areas, if you take a close look to these areas, the protected areas, the ones that we have this deforestation, if they are not that much, they are related to land invasion, illegal miners, illegal loggers, and things like that. So how we are this year compared to last year, and these graphs are up to August 2020. So what we see is that the percentage of deforested area that happened in public lands, in fact, increased until August this year compared to the same period last year. Which means that really, like, people think that they can do whatever in the Amazon, that they won't be punished. And when you see the area deforested, it decreases a lot inside of indigenous territories, but also this year, the same, more or less the same amount of fire, of hot pixels happened inside indigenous territories. So indigenous peoples continue to be the least, how can I say, group that is in fact having fire and deforestation in their lands. Another information that is very interesting is that when you look at the numbers of what is burning in the Amazon, we wouldn't expect that a lot of forest fires, we wouldn't expect to see a lot of forest fires in the region, because last year we didn't have a very dry year. When you have very dry years, such as 2010, 2005, 2007, 2015, 16, we do see a lot of fires because the forest gets very susceptible to fire, and because we have the ignition sources, because people continue to put fire. Because if we didn't have the ignition sources, we could have the heat, we could have the hell in the Amazon, and the forest won't burn. But we have changed a lot our forest, and because we are deforesting a lot, we have created a lot of edge effects. And the edge of these deforestation patches, they changed in their structure, so they get drier, and it's easier for them to be burned. So we are in fact changing the ability of the Amazon forest to act as a barrier to fire. And one very interesting thing is that because last year fires reduced after August, a lot of the areas that were deforested were not burned. And this year, and that accumulated to this year. So which means that we in fact are waiting for having much more fire this year than last year, what has been proved that this is what is going on. This is just, and the most interesting thing is that we have technology to know what these areas were, what these areas are, and we even indicated where the heat map. We gave heat maps of areas where a lot of forest was deforested, and so people, in fact, the army or IBAMA, or people could go to these areas in May, and in fact do something about it, and as Adriana mentioned, act in a strategic way with intelligence, like having intelligence, because it's very unlikely that you can put 20,000 army people in the Amazon if you don't give them a very clear strategy to go to the right places, to fight the right criminal group. They won't do anything to stop the fires. So in fact, what would stop them is to get the big fishes, the big criminal groups, and this it needs a lot of, how can I say, intelligence operations, like police operations, to in fact to reach the core of these groups, and this would cut the stimulus of people to deforest because they will have the sensation that they will be punished. So this impunity sensation that people feel in the Amazon is what is actually a cancer that is taking down our forests. So going to just to demonstrate where the indigenous peoples stay in these situations, we have here the deforestation of 2019, and you can see very clearly here that some of the indigenous territories in this region around near Altamira or Belo Monte dam, we see that a lot of indigenous territories have been invaded, and the deforestation started to grow very quickly in the past years. And here, again, you have the 10 indigenous territories that have been more deforested last year, and they are the same in the list this year. And we can see that most of them, like the Munduruku, as Adriana showed, the Kayapó have suffering with illegal mining, enfim. And also the importance to finish the process of regularization of these lands, because otherwise we will have this situation where we have these indigenous territories called Ituna Itatá, which is one of the most deforested indigenous territories recently in the list, in the rank of deforestation. And those yellow lines here, polygons, are, how can I say, private property registry, voluntary registry inside these indigenous territories. So people are already like demarcating their piece of land in these areas because these indigenous territories didn't get to the final stage of creation, which is, I don't know if this word exists in English, but it's homologation. Maybe it doesn't exist in English. So this is the rank. And we did have a major increase in deforestation from 2008 to 2019 inside indigenous territories, and that was reflex of the Bolsonaro speech, as Adriana mentioned, so I won't enter into that. And we have a similar situation in terms of fire, except for the indigenous territories here in the northwestern part of the Amazon, which also are indigenous territories that are very sensitive to mining and also occupation by farmers and things like that. And this takes us to another problem, which is how these territories, indigenous territories that in fact are doing a major service, having a major service to us Brazilians, to our agriculture as well, because they are mass of forests, like spreading, how can I say, water to the atmosphere through evapotranspiration, and in fact they have a major role in how can I say, as a climatizer, as a comfort, thermic comfort, providing thermic comfort to the surroundings. But also these territories, as the indigenous territories of Xingu, this indigenous park of Xingu, which is one of the last remnant of forests in the large remnant of forests in this region, it's also getting very dry, because I mean deforestation has an impact on the regional microclimate as well. And these indigenous territories have been more sensitive to the spread of fires. So last year, about 10% of the parking of indigenous Xingu Indigenous Park burned, which was 2% more than a El Nino year, which is usually a year where we see a lot of fires going on and spreading inside the forest. Again, this shows the importance of the indigenous park in yellow here. In green here, in the land cover photo, you can see very clear that is the major remnant of forest, and you see that also in the temperature map, that is the coolest area compared to the other deforestation area. So the most important thing is that these fires, they really represent a major health issue. And I don't know how much time I have, but I probably have to finish soon. And this is just to comparing the plumes of smoke that we had in the Amazon. Actually, in fact, this is an aerosol. And we can see very clearly that in the months of August and September, almost the entire Amazon was full of very smoke. I mean, how can I say, particular material that generates or help to make people sick of respiratory illnesses. And this takes us to COVID situation. And I won't go into that, but I will just mention that indigenous territories, they have facing a lot of issues regarding to land invasion. This has been very discussed as a major driver of COVID. I mean, ISA has been putting out very important reports, very good reports on the role of mining as a driver of COVID in some of the of indigenous territories, mainly in the Yanomami territory. So lastly, I mean, it's very important to understand what is the role of deforestation and fires to our economy, and to position ourselves as a country in the international arena. I mean, when you look at talking about climate change, when you look at the Brazilian emissions, we see that about 44% of our emissions is directly associated with deforestation. And when we add that emission to the agriculture emissions, like all the emissions associated with agricultural practices, we see that about 71% of our emissions are related to land uses regarding like agriculture or things like that, or pasture raising, cattle raising in agriculture, and crop cultures. So for us, I mean, to position Brazil to fight climate change, we do need to reduce our major source of emission, and this has to do with fighting deforestation. By fighting deforestation, we reduce the ignitions of fires, so we reduce forest fires, and we also reduce the fires used escaping from deforestation, getting to pasture fields. But we also need to improve our way to manage fires and manage our pasture fields, for example. And this would reduce the other part of our major emissions, which is agricultural emissions. So by saying that, I don't think this government really articulates the impacts that they may have, or they are having, in fact, in our economy and in the agribusiness sector. And I think we, unfortunately, will be see that, I mean, we continue with that at least for 2 more years. I hope not more than that. But I think we need to change. I mean, Brazil has to get back to its track, which its pasture track. We did reduce a lot of deforestation, up to 80% in 2012. And at the same time, we created a lot of protected areas. We created a lot of indigenous territories. I mean, we recognized a lot of indigenous territories. And we did have major exports in soybean, and we had a lot of meat production. So we proved that it's possible. It's just a political will. It seems that right now, this government is in fact protecting some type of criminals activities in the Amazon, and this is, I mean, I really don't understand how this will improve our economy. And I think is that, I think is just to finish, if we can in fact ban 50% of deforestation fires, we do need to invest in strategic enforcement, and we do need to designate public forests for sustainable conservation. And if we need to tackle the other half of deforestation, it's very important to consolidate protected areas and support forest-based economies, and gives economic incentives for private conservation as well, because part of Brazil, I mean, inside of private properties, people can deforest legally, so we need to have some incentives for them not to deforest. And also, I mean, there are thousands of settlers that do need to have better support, the smallholder agriculture, to have a better, good practices in production and to improve their production system. So I think is that, yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Annie and Adriana. I hope you can hear the resounding applause that is coming from all of us for these really important presentations. We have about 15 minutes for a Q&A. And yeah, I second Matt there, clapping, thank you, really. And we have lots of questions that have been put in the chat. So I'm going to just pose some of those, and maybe both of you can give an answer or weigh in as you see as appropriate. So there's a question about different parts of the Amazon, different regions. And the question is, why are there more fires in the indigenous areas in Roraima? So for example, the Raposa, Serra do Sul, or São Marcos and Yanomami, than any other part of the Amazon. And I think there's a couple of other questions that touch on that, which have to do with maybe differences between states. And we're wondering if you could speak to those, both of you.
Well, Adriana can complement, but it's very important to understand that the Amazon biome has also other types of vegetation inside the Amazon. The Raposa Serra do Sol, most of it, I guess, is dominated by a vegetation type. It's more similar with a savanna. So savannas are dependent, like how can I say, ecosystems that are dependent on fire, and they adapted to fire. So they would naturally have more fires. So probably the Raposa Serra do Sol is not, I mean, just correcting, is not the place that has more fire in the Amazon. It has more fire than some other indigenous territories in the Amazon because the majority of these indigenous territories is savanna type of native vegetation and not a forest type of native vegetation.
Yeah, in fact, I'm not sure if I can answer that because I think that Annie has much more information. What I can say from what we have been working directly in the Yanomami territory is that invasions of gold miners have increased a lot in the recent years, especially from last year to now. So I'm not sure how that connects to that, but in terms of deforestation, the main driver inside the Yanomami territory is that.
Thank you. We have another question. I think you both have touched on this, but can you draw a parallel between the policy of the current administration and that of the last two governments? So I know you've mentioned some of the things that are happening currently, but could you just, for people that maybe aren't fully aware of sort of what it looked like before, can you give us a sense of how things have changed?
I will give a broader view then, beginning in the ending, starting of the 2000 years, when Brazil decided as a political definition that it would try to deal with deforestation in a better way and defined this national plan or the Amazonian plan for control of deforestation, putting together different stakeholders and establishing a set of different policies that together allowed us to reduce the deforestation in a very strong way. This have worked very well, I would say, until 2008, 2010. Then we had a shift in the political approach that brought mainly the representatives of the agribusiness sector more into the political decision-making process in the government. And then we started to have more pressure from this sector inside the government for changes in the policies. And it was the moment in which they managed to change the forest code and so give more flexibility to the legislation, with the argument that if we had more flexibility, then everybody would comply with the law in a more easy way. But what we have seen from there up to now is that the pressure for new changes didn't stop. And the perspective that people would assume a new legislation and implement and make it effective didn't work. So what happened was that when we had the political crisis at the end of the Dilma government, there was a very strong participation of these representatives of the agribusiness sector in Congress, in the new government. So although in the last government, which was the Temer government that only had 2 years, although we had more people committed to the environment and still trying to strengthen the institutions, there was already a very strong pressure from the sectors economic sectors that leads the drivers of deforestation. So we didn't have positive results in terms of control of deforestation. And it's important to mention that these representatives of the agribusiness sector in the Congress, their profile are much more landowners than food producers, you know. So there is a part of this dynamic which is too much related to private land ownership in Brazil, which is one of the highest level of concentration of land that we have, I think that in the world. So what we have now, even if the last government was not the best in their policies, there was at least a dispute inside the government, and the institutions were respected. What we have now is a strong work of dismantling and extinguishing the institutions and the strength and enforcement, you know. And so I think that it's nothing that we can compare with the worst policies that we had in the last 30 years, you know. This is completely out of any kind of comparison, because what we have now is the government just having a joint position against everything that comes from environmental policy, and a strong strategy to make things not working, you know.
I agree with Adriana. I think before we didn't have a clear, I mean, even though we had groups inside the government that wanted to have these results that we are having now, it didn't have I mean, they didn't manage to be, how can I say, to have a block of I don't know how to say, a block of people acting towards the same objective. Right now, I think it's all the government and all the agencies and I mean, everybody that is in the common. So it's more difficult to, in fact, get, how can I say, to interact with them, to talk with them, to try to negotiate, or to, I mean, they really don't want to see anything. So, and I think on that, this gives us some type of it highlights the role of the states in a way. And the Amazon states, they have been looking at that very carefully, and some of them are taking this opportunity as an opportunity to maybe bring funds to their states to deal with environmental issues.
Thank you. We have another question from someone who says that they lived in the Amazon in 2008 and visited again in 2018 and saw an increase of large ranchers from the south planting soy and grazing cows for consumption, and that they've burned forests to do so. So this person is asking if you could talk a little bit more about that particular problem and maybe some potential ideas of how it could be stopped.
Do you want to say something, Adriana? I can start, maybe.
Yeah, I will give there are also other questions that I've seen here, for example, about the role of the states and so on. So what I think is that we used to have a legislation, which was the Forest Code, that I agree would be a good starting point to allow the development of different activities in the region, because it would be guarantee a balance between the open areas for production and the forest conservation. So if Brazil just enforced the legislation we had until 2012, it would be okay to have people coming from outside for this kind of activity, although there are many questions about how to guarantee productivity and to be, how to say, a positive agenda for development with these activities that are completely, how to say, rejecting the maintenance of the forest. So, in my point of view, from the beginning, it should not be a problem to guarantee that in open areas we could have the best practices for a better production of any kind of thing. You know, the point is that we don't have the best levels of production, the best standards in production. So we have a low level productivity in areas that are being opened for that, and that makes no sense. So if we already have almost 20% opened, then we could give the best destination to these lands, but not allowing to open new lands for activities that we know that do not bring together social development benefits for the communities or environmental safeguards, you know. So unfortunately, what the Brazilian government is defending now, it's this model that we have to bring people from outside because these people here do not develop the way we think it should be developed. just rejecting all the recognition of the importance of the forest and all the possibilities that have been developed in pilot programs and different initiatives on how the forest can be developed the way it is, how we can improve the sustainable use, how we can increase, for example, tourism, other kind of sustainable uses that the forest can bring that will allow the communities to live the way they want, to keep the forest and to guarantee income. Unfortunately, what happens is that our political system, it's a very, how to say, old-fashioned and a system that will give the better opportunities, not for the best ideas, you know. So what we see now is that even the states do not find ways to be in the front line in terms of innovation, you know. They keep on following the big approach on trying to deregulate what we have so that they allow different activities to work. So we are still trying to push a lot from the state governments, from other stakeholders, even in the private sector, to have alternatives for the economic development that do not demand taking the forest out. But this is still this kind of strong dispute we have, you know. I would like to talk a little bit about what are the opportunities and how we are facing this, but then I think that Annie could finish this answer and then we come back.
No, I think you can go ahead.
No, because I think that one important thing to say is that we are facing a very hard situation, but especially considering environmental issues and indigenous rights issues, as we already knew it was not going to be easy, we have prepared ourselves as social movements and organizations. So we are prepared to litigate against the government. And the majority of the measures that the government wanted to pass, he didn't, because there was either court decisions that didn't allow, as for example, when they decided that they would take the indigenous rights agents from the Ministry of Justice to put in a Ministry of Human Rights, which is led by I'll say a person that defends the action of missionaries inside indigenous territories. So there was a lawsuit in Congress, there was advocacy work in Congress and a lawsuit in the Supreme Court, not allowing the government to change this. It was the first time that the court has done a decision going against the design of the structure of the government from one new government. Because everybody recognized that the new government has the right to define how he wants to work. But since it was very clear that that was something that would go against what the Constitution says in terms of indigenous rights, the Supreme Court rejected that, and the Congress didn't accept. So the government is not, being able to do everything they can, because there is resistance and there is a strong work of litigation. And also, we have been mobilizing a lot people in general to put pressure both in the Congress and in the government. In the government doesn't work very much, but in the Congress it works. So for example, the actual president of the Chamber of Deputies have said that while he was there as a president, he would not bring the bill that allows mining inside indigenous territories to be discussed. And he's there yet, and the bill is not being discussed. So what we think, we have to bring a lot of information, and there are websites and organizations that are following closely, making fact-checking in everything that the government says and all the measures that are published. We try to bring this information to the public in general so that they be aware of what's going on, and that we can ask them to support our work, our demands, so that we don't allow the government to go too far. So of course it's not enough, but it's good to say that since these issues became so important in the opposition of the government, it's being strengthened by other parties, other civil society organizations from other sectors and areas that are all coming together within the social environmental issues, because this is recognized by everybody as a very sensitive situation for these peoples and for the environment in Brazil.
Yeah, just to complement, I would say that with all this fake news and these liars this government likes to do and to use, I think we as a civil society and research institutes, we in academy as well, we have been doing the maximum we can to spread the word out and to engage society. And I think, this is a very important point, you know, the engagement of society, and because as Adriana said, the Chamber of Deputies, they are very sensitive to what society thinks, and they know that not all society wants what is going on in the Amazon. And the most interesting thing is that during the elections, the presidential elections, except I think for Marina Silva, maybe Haddad, I don't know, they had, I mean, they were not even able to discuss much about their environmental platform and the program. I mean, we didn't see a lot of environmental issues in the platforms at all of the candidates. But what we have seen is that if there is something that is threatening this government, is the environmental issue. And I think for that, we as society have a chance to change the game in once, and it's our work, our job in like doing different parts. I mean, we do a lot of research. ISA has another strategy, other institutions has another strategy, but we all want to engage society and also, in fact, try to fight back all these absurds that are happening in our country in terms of changing the law and impacting the environmental agenda, social environmental agenda, I would say.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I think we have time maybe for just two more questions. There's a question, Annie, for you about the sources of fire data in the Brazilian Amazon. So what are the sources, and are there any in situ measurements of fires?
Yeah, there are, we consider like three major types of fires in the Amazon. The first one is the fire that follows deforestation as a process. So people like cut down the forest, wait to dry, and then burn the forest. So this is one of the major types of sources of fire in the region. The other is related to the burn of pasture field, like management of pasture fields with fire. So every 2 to 3 years, people do that to clean the pasture. And the third type of fire is the fire that enters, like escape from deforestation or pasture fields and enter into the forest, and we have the forest fires, which are not very common, but are becoming common because we are changing the ability of the forest to act as a barrier to fires. So those are the main types of fire, which mean that all the sources of fire in the Amazon are anthropogenic.
I think that the speaker or the question asker is asking how are you measuring them? So is it all
we are measuring
data, or how do you know where is fire in what places? And then are there any measurements being taken in the places where the fires are, or is it all
okay, so I would take a part of my answer to take advantage of part of my answer to I mean, we use the hot pixels data as an indicator of fire activities, and this hot pixels data are from a satellite called Aqua, which has a sensor called MODIS. And it passes every day, and the passage is afternoon passage. So it captures all the fires that have a fire front from 30 meters. And we use that as a major indicator. And how we know if the fire is in a deforested area or in a forest area, as I explained before, we use land use, land cover maps for that. And how we know who is setting fire, I mean, that's more difficult to know, but we know if the fire is happening in indigenous lands or in a non-indigenous lands or in a public land, because we have the land tenure map. So we cross all this information, and by crossing that, we know where the fires happen, more likely who is having the fire, not maybe setting the fire, because as we see in some indigenous territories, maybe they don't set the fires, but they have their fires in their territories. And you know, I mean, what is the frequency of the fires?
Thank you so much. I think just maybe one final question. One of the things that you have both spoken to is that the tone from the top, you know, the government or from the president, it has an effect on, you know, perceptions of impunity and such. But you've also both highlighted the ways in which local dynamics, you know, especially around issues of enforcement, also play a role. And I'm wondering if you could give us any positive examples or examples of local initiatives or NGOs or actions on the part of Indigenous groups that have been effective that we might look to for inspiration on how that issue of enforcement or other issues in the Amazon, you know, can we draw inspiration from an example perhaps that either of you could provide?
I will talk a little bit about an effort that we have been doing for a long time. Of course, now this year with the pandemic, everything is a little bit different. But which was the effort of indigenous people from the Xingu Indigenous Park, which found out that the springs of the rivers that forms the Xingu, which passes through the indigenous territory, was all outside of the territory in areas that were used for soy plantations and cattle ranching. So they started to be worried about what would happen with the river, and started first of all to make protection of the boundaries strategy, talking to all the farmers, and then we supported them to make a big meeting of different stakeholders of the region to develop a joint strategy for recovering the forests along the rivers. So the riparian forests. So what happened on that was that with all the difference people had between them, we tried to get what was the demand from each one of the stakeholders groups that could fit into a joint campaign. So for the indigenous people, of course, they wanted the guarantee of the integrity of their territories. And they wanted support for development of initiatives for income generation, for example, such as producing honey, pepper, or other products that they could sell. For the landowners, they wanted more, less expensive strategy for forest recovery because it was too expensive for them. The municipalities wanted to support to have, sanitation systems that they didn't have. So all what they had was going to the river. And there were the agrarian reform settlements that also wanted to have an approach on environmental sustainability for their settlements. So what we did was try to put all these demands together. We developed a technology to make plantations of forests using the machines that plant soils and using what we call muvuka of seeds, which is using the techniques of permacultural planting, when you join all the different seeds and plant them directly in the soil, which is much more expensive than using other ways of restoring. And we increased the restoration in the region in a very sensitive level. We have now more than, I think that almost 10,000 hectares of restoration, which is very few comparing to the Amazon region, but it's the biggest experience of forest restoration in the region. So it was an initiative from the indigenous people to deal with those that were outside of the territory but affecting the territory in a positive situation, just with a strategy that was, let's not talk about our differences, let's talk about what we have in common, which is the water of the Xingu River. And so I think that there are plenty of different initiatives like that. The problem at this moment is that the majority of the support that these initiatives had was, I'll say, avoided by the government by struggling with the Amazon Fund and trying to avoid all other investments that they had in international cooperation programs, you know. But I think that it's a good example on solutions that can raise from the ground and that people are willing to do their best. You know?
Yeah, we also have an experience with the smallholders that we engage them in a process of accessing, facilitate the access to public policies as specific credits to have like better production systems and things like that. And also we did an experiment with payment for environmental services. And what we had in the end of 5 years is that the smallholders engaged in the process, they did have a major reduction in deforestation, and also they increased their income, which was, I mean, the main objective of the project was to prove that if smallholders in the Amazon, they can in fact access public policy, which means specific credit lines and also have all the ability to plan their land and their parcel in a good way, and they would in fact use their resources in a better situation, like having a win-win situation. So as Adriana said, I mean, there are many other types of initiatives that are very positive, what we call a positive agenda for smallholders, large landholders, indigenous peoples in the Amazon, and they are mostly done by NGOs. And but in this moment, I mean, this current moment is very difficult to engage, for example, medium, large landholders and even like settlers in this process, because I mean, for example, when the Xingu campaign that Adriana was talking about, I mean, we had a positive scenario that the soy moratorium, the soy moratorium was there, so everything was demonstrated that I mean, the larger producers, the landholders, they should have to pay attention on the way they were producing. They also would have to restore part of their lands, because if they want to become legal by the forest code. So there were a lot of incentives for concertation. In nowadays, we don't have that moment because the feeling that what the president is saying, keeps talking, is like putting the environment as a bad thing for the country, you know, in a way. So I think this is more difficult to find this consultation again, to engage several stakeholders again. But I'm pretty positive that we are going to change that. Because, I mean, this government, the way it is not going to sustain very far. I mean, yeah, we were like we how can I say, retrocede like 20 years in the way we use and we occupy the Amazon. And we have already demonstrated that that we know how to do it. So I'm an optimist that we are going to change. Unfortunately, I hope we don't get too deep in the hole before we start to change. But I think we will change. I mean, the world is different. The society is different now. We don't have the same heads, I mean, the same thoughts that we had 20 years ago. And I think this is going to play in our side.
Thank you. Thank you so much to both of you. Our time is up, and I apologize to those of you whose questions we didn't get to. But not only thank you for your time today and these wonderful presentations, but also just thank you both for all of the really critical and brave work that you're doing. So, and thank you for sharing that with us today. So I hope you can hear the sound of applause coming from all of our living rooms. Again, I just want to remind everyone that this is a 3-part series, and so we'll be here next week on Monday with a focus on women Indigenous leaders, talking about some of the same issues. So Adriana and Ani, thank you so much, and thank you so much to everyone that worked to make this event possible.